Thanks, Don. Good evening all. The talk tonight concerns Alison's dad, my father-in-law, Wally Henderson. He was the third ever RACQ patrolman, and in his retirement years he was actually a member here of QVVA. But first, before I get on to Wal himself, just a little bit about the Henderson family. Wal was born in 1908. He was the seventh of 10 boys and 1 girl. And parents Herbert and Bertha Henderson were the blacksmiths at Stones Corner. Their only daughter and one of the boys died in infancy. So they had 11 and 9 survived, I guess, which is probably par for the course back in those days. Henderson's built the First World War memorial gates at Langlands Park at Coorparoo. They also built all of the wrought ironwork for the double-storey Ernest Baines stand at the exhibition. Back then, railway crossings over roads were protected by gates, and motorists had to stop, get out, open the gate, let themselves through, shut the gate again, because trains had right of way. Henderson's constructional and ornamental smithy, as they were known, built hundreds, maybe thousands, of sets of railway gate hinges and chute bolts. In 1917, Wal's oldest brother, Charlie, built a service station on Logan Road at Stones Corner in front of the smithy. Over time, he went on to sell Indian motorcycles and then overland cars. Get it right eventually. Later on, it became Henderson's Shell service station on Logan Road, Stones Corner. Some of you might remember it. It was on Logan Road, between Samios's Hardware and the Stones Corner pub, right beside the council library. And it operated until the 1970s. But tonight's more about Wal and his 37 years as an RACQ roadside patrolman. He wrote down his RACQ memories for his family, and it's these memoirs that I'm largely relying on tonight. They're not structured, they're not polished in any other way, they're just the way he remembered them and he wrote them down. Wal's first contact with the RACQ was in 1925. He was 17 at the time, and he accompanied his brother Eddie in a sidecar on Sunday breakdown service. Eddie was one of 5 men employed just on Sundays by the club to patrol the most popular roads in Brisbane at the time for Sunday drives. They all used motorcycles and sidecars. Eddie had a 4-cylinder FN that he used. The main roads patrolled were Tamborine Mountain, Redcliffe via Petrie, there was no Hornibrook Highway in those days, the road to Cleveland, and the South Coast Road as far as the ferry on the Logan River. Southport was considered too far for a one-day drive. Wal's brother Eddie had the Tamborine run mainly. The run up the mountains was very beautiful. Hang on, just something I'll read here. It's a very poor photo, but it says, "The patrols of the Royal Automobile Club of Queensland, which yesterday patrolled the Redcliffe Road, equipped with a kit of tools in order to render mechanical first aid to motorists in trouble. The Cleveland Road will be patrolled today, the Tamborine Road tomorrow, and the Redcliffe Road again on Easter Monday." So I guess that was over Easter. So, yeah. So, as I said, he had the Tamborine run, and the run up the mountain was very beautiful. Thick scrub with staghorns and ferns on trees close to the road. Near the top at Curtis Falls was a big wooden water wheel that used to power the Curtis Brothers sawmill. The water wheel was built in 1888, 24-foot diameter, and was located on Cedar Creek, just upstream from where the Cedar Falls Cafe is today. So Wal and his brother Eddie would have to call at places such as corner stores and wayside fruit stalls to see if there are any calls or messages from RACQ members in trouble, remembering, of course, no mobile phones in those days. He remembers on one occasion having to put a sign up to say that there was a police street speed trap ahead. It was a cloth sign reading, "Caution, observe speed limit." Wal did temporary work for the club at this time. One of the unusual benefits of club membership was having patrolmen park cars for members at country shows and here at the exhibition. He parked them at the Ekka for 3 years. He said members had free parking at the Water Street Army Drill Yard, wherever that was. He did parking of members at country shows. The country people were liked to park around the main ring. They were great. If you were near them when they were having a cuppa, you were always invited to join them. He remembers during one cuppa, Barnes Auto's towing service name was mentioned with their slogan, "We never sleep." One old chap replied, "No, their bloody conscience won't let them sleep." I guess he found their prices were a bit steep. Wal also delivered cars from the rail or the wharf. He once delivered a car for a bank manager who had been transferred to Wandai. The manager thought it was too far to drive the car himself. Up until about 1934, only part-time patrols were employed by the club. As full-time, Then, in 1934, Brother Eddie and Les Gerard were the first roadside patrols to be employed on a full-time, permanent basis. Wal was employed a year or so later as number 3 patrol. To qualify as a patrol, had to have an A-grade motor mechanic certificate, have a current driving licence for a motorcycle, car and truck, membership of the Motor Mechanic Institute of Queensland, and later be a member of the Institute of Automotive Engineers. So they were very well qualified. The club's office at the time was in Edward Street. The office was a club. 3 full-size billiard tables, card tables, showers, restroom, etc. The 3 patrols had the use of these tables while waiting for calls. Wal was just married at the time. He had his own motorcycle, a 1924 Indian Scout, which he bought for £12.10 in 1933. The club then moved to Queen Street opposite the Customs House, which I think was right beside where the blood bank is and next to Barnes Auto. Do you know that area? Matchless twin-cylinder motorcycles were used by the number 1 and 2 patrols. When Wal started, he had a 3.5 horsepower single, and later an AJS 10 horsepower twin, and then a 12 horsepower Indian with a reverse gear, 1938. I think that's his. That's the little AJS, I think. But then he graduated. I think that's the Indian. I don't know for sure, but anyway, that's Wal on his bike at his house at Cooperoo that we then owned many years later for anybody who'd been there. Wal volunteered for war service, but RACQ roadside patrols were classed as essential workers, keeping motorists mobile. Also, when a ship arrived or a train came in with wounded soldiers, they arranged for members to pick up the soldiers and take them to their homes or to hospital as required. During the war years, the midnight to 8 a.m. shift was cut out. Also, in the war years, beside the motorcycles, they had the use of a Morris 8 Tourer, a Chev truck with a breakdown crane, and a 96A Whippet Ute. I think there's some of the fleet about that time. Later on, they had an International truck with a crane, 2 Ford Anglias, 3 Morris Z Utes, and after the war, a fleet of 6 ex-army Jeeps were purchased. Once a year from 1910, the club held a Children's Day picnic, and they were doing that way up into the 50s. I don't know when it stopped, but way up into the 50s. A picnic for underprivileged and crippled children from homes around the place. They'd be picked up by members and taken to the Sandgate. Cars would assemble in Wickham Terrace and all move off in convoy to Sandgate with balloons and decorations fluttering in the breeze. And Alison can remember some of those picnics very well. And of course the kids from the underprivileged homes they had a fabulous day. Besides roadside service during this time, Wal was called upon to go to different schools with a police officer to lecture kids on road safety. Later, the children's safety crossings were started, and of course that's now the Lollipop Ladies. In the early 1950s, Wal was called upon to start country vehicle inspection service. It seems that Road Patrol's activity up until then was only in the southeast corner of the state. The club had a 53 Holden FJ panel van, fully equipped with all the testing gear. Wal covered the area from Coolangatta to Cairns. He was on the road for a month at a time, away from home, travelling slowly up the coast from town to town. He loved it because he saw lots of new country. He was in Cairns when a cyclone struck. Luckily for him, he was staying in a solid brick pub. Shop windows were blown in, roofing iron was blown off. The mango tree, out of town a bit, under which he did most of his inspections, didn't have a leaf on it. He transferred to the technical department whilst at Queen Street. Then in the early 50s, I think it was, Water Street premises was built at Spring Hill, and they did all sorts of checks there, mainly inspection and report on new vehicles prior to being delivered and on vehicles close to having their warranty expire, and that's where they did so many of the checks. I used to pick him up from work at Water Street, and I remember one day he said to me that day he had a Chrysler, not the Valiant, but the Chrysler by Chrysler, the big 360 cubic inch job. He'd had it on the hoist for a Supreme Court judge, brand new. He was about to do a check on it. 4 main bolts holding the front end in, and only 3 of them had nuts on. So he got Austral Motors to come with a tow truck and take it away and fix it. Once a month, the patrols had a week of driver training, and later Wal was in charge of this section. He didn't like it much because he missed the outside life. For his last 22 years of the club, he received 22 safe driving awards from the Queensland Road Safety Council. And then he went on to record a few of the things that happened that he could remember. Returning from Cleveland on a road service call, he was caught in a storm at Belmont. Hail and wind was too bad to continue on the motorbike, so he pulled off the road, got down between the bike and the side box and put a ground sheet over him. They had a 6 foot by 8 foot ground sheet that they used to put over the bonnet and over themselves when it was raining if they were working on an engine. So the storm eased and he headed for home at Cooperoo. It was now dark. Bottom of Camp Hill, he noticed a torchlight flashing. Slowed down, stopped, lucky for him. There was a man with a push bike who'd run into a wire stretched across the road, about 3 feet above the ground. A tree branch had blown down over the wiring and brought the wire down. So after checking the wire to make sure if it was alive, Wal said he would cut it before anyone ran into it. Make it a good length, the bloke said. I could do with a good radio aerial. So he did. At night, when returning from Miles after finishing parking members' cars at the showground, at Miles. Hopping along on his motorcycle, very tired, but glad to be on his way home in the dark from Miles. Whilst rounding a curve on the highway, Wal saw what appeared to be the lights of the big town ahead. He slowed down, trying to make out what town was coming up. Just as well for him, he finished up among a mob of sheep. No damage to him or the sheep, but their eyes reflected in the headlights from his motorbike. Another time at the Stanthorpe Showgrounds. Grasshoppers were bad at the time. Along the way, the hoppers were travelling across the road about 2 feet from the ground. On stopping at the showgrounds, he noticed that the nickel-plated rims on the motorcycle wheels were covered with squashed hoppers. On returning to the bike later to clean up the mess, to his amazement, not a sign of a grasshopper to be seen. The local ants had done the job for him. RACQ received many calls from priests for road service. Begs the question whether the cars that the parishioners gave the priests were bits of clunkers in the first place. But anyway, on one occasion they received a call from a Father Fooey. It was the 1st of April and they knew what this was going to be. And they thought, nah, they better go and have a look. And just as well they did. There was a Father Fooey. Tips were very good in those days and very acceptable. Sometimes more than a week's wage. So much so that the club printed on the road service sheets that members had to sign when the repairs to their cars were done, printed on them that tips were not allowed. But to some, this was actually a reminder that tips were fairly appropriate given the circumstances. Some would give a tip saying, "Would you mind this for me, please?" And others would leave something in the toolbox on the sidecar or shove a note down into his gauntlets that he was wearing when he was on the bikes. At one time, the president of the club offered Wal a £1 tip. His car had broken down and Wal had attended to it. And Wal thought this was a trap for sure, so he said to him, "Sorry, this is against the club rules," to which the president replied, "Rules are only made to be broken." So Wal accepted his quid. A lot of money for a family man at that time. The RACQ had pick-up points on the main roads into Brisbane, where patrols met country members who did not like driving into the city. Do you remember the round yellow sign saying "Meet RACQ patrolman here"? I can remember one outside Skurs at Mount Gravatt and another one out at Astley.
Yeronga Park.
Yeronga Park? Yeah. Some members would follow the patrol and drive themselves to their city destinations, but a lot wouldn't. 3 RACQ motorcycles were fitted with front tow bars. A U-type bar was fitted to the front fork assembly of the bike with a detachable clamp which tightened onto the rear bumper of a country member's car. Not practical on today's cars with bits of plastic that masquerade as bumpers, but it was the done thing back then. The patrolman then drove the member's car to the city destination, then unhooked the bike and took himself back to the headquarters again.
They had drive girls after that.
And then they had girls come in specifically for that purpose, yeah. In that little book you're reading there, 1955 that happened. Yeah. Wal was always surprised by the number of calls they got for cars locked with keys inside. One case came to mind. A bank manager locked his car in and locked the keys in his car. On opening the car, Wal was called on to take the keys to the manager at the bank. "How do you open up?" he asks. "Well, first one has to be a member of the Burglars Union," Wal told him. "The rest is a trade secret. What would be the good of having locks if we told you how to open them?" On another occasion, a commercial traveller does the same thing. Car locked with keys inside in Queen Street, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, outside the Commercial Travellers building. While Wal's getting the necessary gear, the traveller said to Wal, "Hurry up, will you? Is there no quicker way of getting inside?" To which Wal said, "Yeah, break a window." "Give me a hammer," he said. Wall said, pick a small window, the quarter glass up front. So with a whack at the window, he went to work. 3 or 4 blows were necessary. By this time, a crowd had gathered, so he got inside and went for his life. Another occasion, a member called for help. The car was locked in Adelaide Street. Said the key wouldn't open the door. On going to the door, Wall noticed same car, same make, same colour, parked 2 cars up from him. Yep, right key, wrong car. They had a boss they called Hydraulic Jack. He'd lift anything and put it in the back of his own car. When he wasn't around, the patrols would remove it and place it back where it was originally. This bloke had given 2 bottles which he wanted filled with distilled water from the iceworks down the valley. He got the first lot okay, but later on the patrols reckoned it was just as easy to fill them from the tap. Typical roadside breakdowns. Faulty ignition system, no spark, caused by distributor points pitted or dirty, or closed up gap through lack of lubrication on the points cam. Often there were faulty coils, particularly common on Hillmans, with their coil mounted upside down, letting water go into the top, corrosion and no go. Fuel blockages, all cars with flexible lines at fuel pumps, like Vauxhalls. That's what he wrote. During the war years, when petrol was rationed by coupons, Wall was offered a Duesenberg for £10 by the vacuum oil rep. There was no way such an offer could appeal to a working man during the war with 7 daughters at home. Oh, how I wish I'd asked Wall more about that car and that deal before he died. You know, just accepted it as fact and didn't ask more questions. He attributed his long, healthy life to the open air work, meeting the general public, made happy at times to get their car going after the breakdown, and it didn't cost them anything. He had no business worries. He forgot work when the day was finished, not like his brothers who had their own businesses. Charlie and Ernie both had garages at Stones Corner. Arthur had the Springworks at Stones Corner. Bill and George with Dad in the smithy shop, and Les was sales manager for Golden Fleece in Queensland. They all did well, but didn't live long enough to enjoy their money. Wall retired in March 1972 after 37 years and 8 months with the club. In his retirement, Wall and Alison's mum Dora joined QVBA, driving one of our Model A's at the time. Their first ever car was an Austin 7 Chummy. Come on. And we hunted high and low to try and find one for Wall to restore. We couldn't find one, so we settled on a pointy-tailed Sports that old Bill Jones had, for some of us that might remember Bill from way back. Wall restored the mechanicals and I rebuilt the body for them, lengthening the doors by about 6 inches to let a couple of 70-year-olds get in and out easier. They rallied it for quite a few years until age caught up with them. The car's now painted yellow and lives in Mount Morgan with Greg Shuker. Wall was a keen participant in the annual RACQ Old Boys reunion, becoming their oldest there year after year. For his 90th birthday, the club bought their restored AJS and sidecar to his birthday party. He threw a leg over and reminisced with the modern day patrols who bought it out for the afternoon. Looks pretty good for 90, eh?
What year was that, John?
Well, you can work it out. He died aged 95 in 2003, so it's about 1998. Yeah. He had been a member of the RACQ for 68 years. So that takes it up to, what did I say, March or something in 72. And Cole started in June 1972. So over to you, Cole. Thanks.
June 72 I started there. And some of the paperwork that John sent me was one of the old patrols, was the Happy Mitchell. And Happy lived just down the road from where my mother-in-law lived, and we lived with the mother-in-law in Alderley for 12 months after I came back from overseas. Married a daughter there, and that's probably how I sort of got to go to the RACQ, because he just lived around the corner from mother-in-law, and we got talking and one thing and another, and I had thought when I originally lived in Adelaide before I went away about joining the RAA down there, so I thought when I came back I'd do that. So I started in June 72, and I started off with a Ford Escort, last of the four-wheel drum brakes of the Ford Escorts they had there. I scored that one. It was a bit of a handful to drive in wet weather. The front brakes used to lock up and all sorts of weird things. Anyway, I had that for a couple of years, and it was getting a bit hard, and I was they called me out one night. It was a really bad wet night. I don't know if you remember the Amoco garage in Mains Road at Kangaroo Point. Just down by Logan corner there. It was on Mains Road at Kangaroo Point, I think it was. And I think that's where it was. Anyway, I drove in there really slowly just after I finished the job, and they had that red cement, and yeah, the four-wheel drums on there. I just touched the brakes and it just skated on this red cement. Well, in the middle of the pumps, they had a glass office. So I just skated into that, and there was just a hell of a crash, bang. And I thought, well, somebody's heard it. So anyway, the next morning, or that night actually, I think I fronted up and told them what I'd done, and they said, oh, well, you know, don't do it again. And I think anyway, probably may not have been the first one to do that, because straight away after that they did away with that box in the middle, and so I used to get petrol there off and on for the running out of petrols and people running out of petrol, and we had a 10 litre can we used to carry, and everybody used to run out of petrol. Well, during the floods, we stopped going around to people who'd run out of petrol. We just couldn't handle it. There was too many people. We only did a home service, and actually during the what was it, in the 80s when they had that fuel problem, yeah, we stopped service on road. We stopped road service on people running out of petrol then, because we just couldn't handle so many people breaking down, running out of petrol. And you were saying lockouts. Well, yeah, they were, sometimes you go to those and they'd be a really hard car, like a BMW or something, and you think, oh, you know, going to be a real problem, this one. I went to a young Chinese couple one afternoon, and I got there, and the guy had this big, it was a BMW convertible, and he had this big knife about this long, and he was about ready to carve the top out of the BMW. And I said, just hang on a minute, you know, I might get lucky. Anyway, I did that day, yeah, and I was just really just straight in with a bit of wire and unhooked it straight away. So yeah, he had his young daughter was locked in the car. So he was a bit uptight. So, but luckily we got there pretty quick. You know, any time that somebody was locked in the car, a baby or something like that, we always dropped everything and bolted to that car, and especially in the summertime. So that was one of the ones that stuck in my mind. Another one was in the Grange. A lady had a Saab 99, I think it was, 95, 99. Anyway, She was in Webster Road there. She was a hardware store there just around the back of Webster Road. Saturday afternoon, and I got there and she'd, I don't know what she did, she locked herself in the car, and actually it turned out to be that there was actually a fault in the computer system. I tried turning the key off and on and didn't have much luck there, and everything had closed. The windows had gone up, the sunroofs were closed, all the doors had locked, everything had just gone into a full lockdown. I got onto Abbotsford, with a Red X at Abbotsford Road there with the Saab people, and he said, well mate, he said, I can't help you. He said, don't know what to do. He said, just keep turning the key off and on and see what happens. And I said, okay. So she was getting pretty upset by then. And anyway, we did that for a few more times, and just luckily suddenly everything opened up. So we got her out, got that towed away. But I actually found out later on they had the same problem in Europe. They were having that problem in Europe with that particular model. So that was another one. But most of them were fairly easy to get into. Commodores, if they were deadlocked, we could get in the back door. They issued us with, I think it was 15 pieces of wire for different cars, different bits of wire, and we had a list of where and what sort of thing. And so anyway, that was a lockdown, we sort of got in and out of those. And yeah, I see there on the photo you were saying about the Chev tow truck. I wondered if that was the original Chev with the twin booms on the back. Don't think it was, but anyway, old 22, when I started there in 72, they had the Dodge truck with a slant 6 in it. Must have been late 50s, early 60s, I think. And we used to get rostered onto, for a day, they put us in a tow truck for a day. I never had a tow truck licence when I joined, so I got a tow truck licence. They just trained me for a couple of days and went down to local and got a truck licence. Anyway, it was a really sudden death thing to drive. They put an extra booster on the brakes, and with no load on it, you just barely touch the brake pedal and the thing would dance all over the road. But luckily, one day I had a Fairlane on the back, and I was going down Coronation Drive, and a bloke in a little car just pulled in front and hit the skids. Well, I just jammed on everything, and then he tore the tyres off the truck, I think. But luckily, with the weight of the Fairlane, it just really hung on the road and stopped really well. So yeah, I must have been 2 inches from the bloke's bumper bar, I think, when I stopped. So that was probably the worst one I can remember. But that's one of the problems. People tend to cut them, because I always left a fair space ahead of me for that particular reason, but the other cars were pulling in front of you. So yeah, that was another one and think of. And I started off with the Escort. Then during the 74 floods, I drove a minivan. That used to surprise a few people. I pull up in the minivan, and as we had so many, they used to break down so much with those. It was basically dirty engines and not tuned properly. And that was most of the problem with them, that they'd short out. The ignition system was just short out. So yeah, with all the rain, so much rain at that time, you run out of dewatering fluid pretty quick. I found the best dewatering fluid is diesel. Just spray them with diesel, give them a real good spray of diesel, and that seems to dissipate all the water. And yeah, I started many a car by just spraying them with diesel, and they don't catch fire either. Some of that dewatering fluid actually catches fire. So that was another good thing. But yeah, the Mini, that surprised a lot of people driving that in the wet. But you probably know the Kedron Park pub. That corner there was notorious for flooding in wet weather. Well, I nearly come unstuck on that corner because I was driving the Mini and I had to get to the other side and there was water across the road and I didn't realise it was quite as deep as it was. So I was up about halfway up the windscreen. And we still got through all right, but what we had is actually the engine drawers kept clean and well tuned. We had a rubber cap over the distributor cap, but also we had a plastic cover with some suckers on it over the bonnet, round and underneath and up underneath, tagged up underneath. So he actually had like an air pocket inside, and just the weight of the tools in the back. And yeah, anyway, I got through and there was a couple of coppers on the other side. They just sort of looked and shook their head and thought, how do you do that? You know, with a Mini. But so it's amazing where you can go with them things, and if they're tuned properly. And yeah, we had a lot of problems, and people came out and in the 74 floods and just they came out to look at everything, and needless to say they got stuck in water. So in the end we had a problem just getting to so many people. So in the end we had to just do home service. It got so bad. We just basically just towed them away. That's all we could really do. Just yeah, and then I went for the Mini. I had a little Toyota Light Ace. I had a couple of those. They weren't a bad little car actually, because they were better than the Mini or the Escort, because the Light Ace had the door that came up like that. So you had a big long. When you backed up to it, you had a something you could stand under. So it worked out really well. And so I had 2 or 3 of those, and some of the other guys didn't like them, but I liked them for that reason, because they were really good in wet weather. But they were just a little force on them, but they worked well, and it's amazing what you can move with them actually. I probably looked a bit odd, but I towed actually a Coca-Cola truck with it down when I was down the valley. I had to shift this Coca-Cola truck, but lucky it was just a little bit of a gradient. We managed to get it just to roll. So I hooked on the Toyota Light Ace on the front of it and just pulled it and down the road a little bit. And it probably looked a bit of a strange sight, the Toyota Light Ace pulling a big truck full of Coca-Cola. But anyway, we did that and sort of got that fixed. And another time I had a bloke at Stafford. He was bogged down the yard, it was raining, and he was right down, it was a slopey piece, he was right down in front of the shed. And I said, well, 2 chances of getting you out of here, mate, because I'm not going down there to get bogged. Anyway, just luckily he was a fisherman, and he had a really long, fairly solid anchor rope, and so he was down there, but luckily right on the corner of his thing there was a big tree. So I just hooked the rope on the front of him, pulled it up around the tree, and I was halfway down the street. And as I was going down the street, I pulled him up, and he just beat the horn when he got to the top. And so I pulled him out that way. So you sort of do all sorts of things on the road. You're not really supposed to, but you do. Just to get somebody going. I suppose there's lots of things I just can't remember all of them, but...
How long were you in the RACQ for?
Sorry?
How many years were you in the RACQ?
27.
27?
Yeah, I started on in June, the 7th of June, and I finished on the 7th of July, 1999. Yeah, in the beginning we had radios, just ordinary UHF radios, and then we went to a thing called Radtech. That was sort of like a half a computer, half a radio. And then, they worked pretty good. But we had dead spots around the place with radios and the Radtech. And if you were down like underneath car park, Yeah, your radio never ever worked down there, so if you had a hard job down there, sometimes you'd have to come back out and tell them you're not going to be a while longer. So I spent most of my time down around the city, because being living at Kelvin Grove, I was the closest to the city, so I spent a lot of my life in the city, Paddington, sort of Auchenflower, Toowong, and yeah, you were saying they suspended the midnight shifts. Well, we used to do a shift from 11 to 7 in the early, and it still runs, I think. But in the early days, in the 70s and early 80s there, one patrol would cover the whole of Brisbane. And so in those days, we didn't get that many calls actually. Some days you'd start at 11 o'clock and you'd start down in Water Street depot. And you might be there all night, and you mightn't do anything all night till maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. But then you might have a taxi, you might have a milkman broken down, you might have some late revellers, young kids in backs of cars and things. They leave the lights on, the batteries go flat, things like that. But yes, you could travel pretty good in those days, because if you went out the back of Inala, you had to be careful out there. You fall off the end of the earth back out there in the back of the 70s. There was just nothing out there. It was as black as coal. And you really sort of, if you got a bit disorientated, yeah, you didn't really know where Brisbane was. You sort of get out of the car and start to look for a haze or a bright light on the, and you know, well, that's Brisbane over there, sort of thing. But yeah, it was really dark out there in the early days. But you might have a job at Inala there, and the next job might be Aspley. And so you'd be in flying gear from Inala. But it was pretty good really, because in those days there was very little traffic on the road in the late 70s and that. So as long as you stuck to the main road, all the lights came back to green. They automatically came back to green on the main roads. And you could really fly through the city. And I could get from Inala to Aspley in around about 20-25 minutes. But I'd be in real flying gear. But the coppers, you know, they knew what we were doing, but they just sort of turned a blind eye. So I got lucky there really, and I never got a ticket all the time, and all the rules I broke. I know I went to a job at a set of block of lights. He was right on the block of lights, was broken down, bloke. Anyway, he was going this way and I was going that way, and I got up and to the lights, and I just did a U at the lights. Well, you're not supposed to do that. Copper was standing there and he just sort of looked at me and he goes, you're not supposed to do it. But anyway, I think I got away with it because this guy was blocking a lane right at the lights, and they just wanted to get him out of the way. So in those days we just carried tow rope, about a 1-inch tow rope with a couple of D shackles on it, just hook them up and just tow them down the road a bit, get them out of the way. So yeah, I got lucky there, so I never got a ticket all the time, but some of the guys were running 8 and 9 points. You know, I don't know why they could book me anyway, maybe I just got lucky. But yeah, I had a lady at Auchenflower about 8 o'clock one morning, and she was on a high rise down there, and there was nothing really wrong with the car. What had happened is she couldn't get a plumber or anything anyway, so what had happened is she said, oh, the toilet system was just running water all the time. She just couldn't get to work. So anyway, so we went up and had a look at it. What had happened, the comb had got into the system somehow or other and jammed it. And the water was just constantly running. So we fixed that up in a couple of minutes. That was no problem. Anyway, she worked at Channel 9 and she was a bit late for work. And about a month later, I had a bloke, one of the executives from Channel 9. I said to him, I said, had one of your ladies from Channel 9. Yeah, she lived in Auckland. had this problem with the toilet. He said, yeah, he said, she told us that, but none of us really knew whether to believe her or not. So, yeah, that was a funny one. But yeah, sometimes you go to the elderly women and I think they were just lonely at times. They'd break, you know, they'd be at home and they'd be say there was something wrong with the car, but I could sometimes never find anything wrong with the car, and I think they just wanted to chat. I'd just go up to the kitchen, make a cup of tea and sit and talk to them for half an hour. And I went to one old bloke one day, and under his house, he was a model shipbuilder, mate. He had all these model ships, you know, they were Navy ships and yachts and tugs and rowing boats and all sorts of. They were beautifully made, and all under his house was just all full of. I don't know whatever happened, you know. I guess, you know, but they were really nice. But yeah, you go, and then you know, I fixed a few lawnmowers and a few washing machines in my time. People call you out for something, there's really nothing wrong, and you know, they can't mow the lawn or something, so you fix the lawnmower, or you might, you know, do something on the washing machine to fix it. You do sort of things that you're probably not really supposed to do, but you do just to help people out, you know. Yeah, you do all sorts of stuff. Other things I probably can't remember, but I'll probably remember when I see you. But
excuse me, does RACQ stand for Repair Anything Club of Queensland?
sorry, did it what?
Repair Anything Club of Queensland, RACQ.
Did take your mask off.
Repair Anything Club of Queensland, RACQ.
Oh, repair anything, yeah, okay, yep. Well, that's about what it was at times, I think, yeah. But
It's interesting you mentioned how the Dodge tow truck used to pass itself with the brakes. The RACQ truck, the Bedford, the historical mob have got.
that's a Chev, I think, isn't it?
Now they got a Bedford.
It's a Bedford, is it?
Bedford, yeah. We recently did the brakes on it because they couldn't figure out every time they put the foot on the brake, the back end had passed the front.
Oh, yeah.
And the brakes had all been done up on the thing, and they decided to try and fix it because they could never drive. No one could ever drive the damn thing. You know, gravel at the back would lock up and round and
Yeah, well, that was what happened with the Dodge. You know, you had
this
to
was a
really,
very simple fault. They connected the front brakes up to the rear system, and it was getting twice as much pressure to the rear as none to the front.
That'll do it.
They had about 15% bias to the front wheels and 85% to the rear.
yeah. Yeah, well, this Dodge was a real dynamite thing to drive when it was empty. You had to be really careful, especially wet weather. Because we also, you probably remember the RACQ had a caravan they used to take from shopping centre to shopping centre. Well, if you were doing tow truck duty, quite often you'd shift that from one shopping centre to another. So that would take a couple of hours of a day. And that was a good job to do. It was a fairly easy job. But yeah, those drive girls came on there. We used to do that same thing. You pick them up at Kedron and you drive them. You pilot them through, but you had to be really careful. Sometimes you'd lose them. You know, you had to watch them all the time. And I don't know you just lose them and you go back and see if you can hunt them down. But most times it's pretty right. Most times you got them through without any real problem. But so we never actually drove. We only ever piloted them. And then the other thing, we had to stop doing old 2.2, which was a tow truck. We had to stop using that as well because when the early Commodores came out, when we picked them up, we opened the door, the body bent. So that's why they went to tray tops. So we had to do away with all those hooks. They were okay in the early cars, in the old early cars, were no real problem. But, yeah. So they sort of separated the systems out. After Wal left and I came on, they had sort of like the drive girls who did that, and then they had the tow truck. Well, I did tow trucks for a while, but then they got specialised tow trucks, and they had the engineering section and the roadside section and the tourist section and all that stuff. They sectionalised everything. But we had a fairly good time really on the road breakdown service. Most times things went along reasonably easy. Probably other things I haven't thought of at the moment that happened.
You have to
You
start
do get
writing
some
them
funny
down like
things.
Wal did.
Sorry?
You have to write them down like Wal did.
I probably should have really, but yeah, I'll think of them off and on. Things suddenly pop
Well,
up.
it's not too late. He was 90 when he started writing them down, Cole.
Oh gee, okay. Yeah, well, he's 10 years ahead of me. Yeah. Anyway,
No, it's good.
I think that'll probably do it.
Cole and John, thank you very much for the presentation. Very, very much appreciated. I hope the members enjoyed it.